Hi, I'm Mike Kraft for the Smithy Company. I'd like to welcome you to our shop and to the Smithy community of craftsmen. Over the years, we've helped thousands of independent craftsmen, metal workers, and woodworkers enjoy the benefits of owning their own home workshop. We sincerely hope that you enjoy working with your Supershop as much as so many of our owners have told us they do. It's a great machine, rugged, powerful, very versatile, and like any machine tool, the more you know about it, the more you'll be able to use it to your own advantage. This video is your important first step in learning how to get the most out of your new Supershop. Here's what we're going to cover. We'll show you how to safely and accurately. The casters fit right in the corner of the leg like this, with the wheel up, and this hole against the side of the leg. This one is right, so I'll place it here on the shelf next to the corner it fits and find the other one. No, that's not it. All right. All right, there, this one fits, so I'll place it down right here. Now, when you have all the components in the right place, you can attach them to the legs. Slip one caster assembly on each end of the foot wheel shaft and mount them on the inside of the stand leg. Place one screw in each side to hold the assembly in place. Then go around and put the rest of the screws in. Remember, all of these instructions are in the owner's manual. Just keep the manual by your side as you put the casters on, and you'll have no problem. When the casters are on, turn the stand on its side and lift it up. It's best if you get help to lift the stand. Now let's check the casters. To lower the casters, simply press down on the kicker with your foot twice. Dave, you get your end. Now we'll position the stand next to the shipping pallet with the front of the stand facing the machine. That way, when we lift the machine onto the stand, everything will be in the right spot. To retract the casters, simply push down again on the kicker. Go ahead, Dave. And there you go. The stand has to be set down solid on the floor for the rest of the assembly process. We're now ready to mount the machine onto the stand. This is not a difficult job as long as you follow the instructions in the operator's manual step by step. There are 5 steps to mounting the machine, and we'll run through each step and show you how it's done. Step 1, take a look around the machine to make sure all of the control handles and locking knobs are in place. Some of these handles may have been removed so that they would not be damaged in shipping. A complete list of these parts is in the owner's manual. The handles that are not in place will be in the accessory box. Remember to install the locking knob in the tail base support stand. Screw the knob in, but for now, don't let the threads extend out past the inside of the casting. There are also 2 bolts locking the bed to the support stand on the left. These bolts should be removed now and replaced with locking knobs. Okay, step 2. Move the power head and carriage so that their weight is evenly distributed along the weigh tubes, as we have them here. Remember to lock the power head and carriage in place. Step 3. Loosen the 2 support stand locking knobs and support the weight of the machine on a stack of 4x4s. Place this wood under the weigh tubes. Never let the weight of the machine rest on the bottom of the power head. You can now remove the 2 bolts holding the support stand to the shipping pallet and mount the support to the left end of the stand. Use 4 sets of bolts, washers, and nuts. At this point, you want to set all the bolts in place finger tight. In step 4, we're going to remove the shipping bolts holding the tail base to the pallet and carefully lift the machine onto the stand. The machine weighs around 200 pounds, so make sure you have adequate help to lift it. When you have it up, hold the headstock end of the bed in place on the support stand until the machine is bolted down on the other end. Again, there are 4 bolts used to attach this end of the machine. Put them all in place, then check the headstock end of the bed to see that it is setting square on the support stand. The distance between the bed and the support stand casting, here and here, should be the same on both sides. This looks good, so the locks can be turned in to hold the bed in this position. Now, if the bed was off-center, you can use the lock screws to jack the bed over into the right position. When the machine is centered on the stand, securely tighten all the mounting bolts. This is an important step in the assembly of the machine, So double check your work to make sure all of the bolts are tight. The fifth and last step is to adjust tension on the lift assist torsion spring. You'll have to make this adjustment with the machine in the vertical position. Before you tilt the bed up, move the power head and carriage all the way to the right side so that it's easier to lift the bed. Lock the power head and carriage in place. Then release the support stand locks and pivot the machine up. When you have the bed in the vertical position, hold it in place and lock the tail-based locking knob. Make sure it is locked securely before you let go. On the back side of the pivot assembly is a plate that looks like a dial with holes around the outside edge. This is the pivot hub that holds the tension on the spring. To set the tension, insert the special spanner wrench into 2 of the holes in the pivot hub. Then turn the pivot hub counterclockwise to take out the slack in the spring. As you turn, look through the holes in the hub to find the bolt holes. Now continue turning until the next set of holes in the hub line up with the bolt holes in the tail base. Hold the tension there and screw in all 3 cap screws. This is one job where you want to make sure all your screws and your Allen wrench are close at hand before you start. Remember, all of these instructions are in the owner's manual. Now that the spring tension is set, do not remove the tail base from the stand without first relieving the tension on the spring. Now, that's a very important warning. I think you can appreciate what would happen if these bolts were taken out now. This base casting would snap up very quickly, leaving the machine totally unsupported. Again, do not remove the tail base from the stand without first relieving the tension on the spring. And save your spanner wrench. If you ever decide to remove your machine from the stand for any reason, you'll have to use the wrench to first release the tension on the spring, then remove these bolts. Okay, the majority of the assembly is done. All we have left to do is attach the legs to the 2 tables, assemble the lathe tool rest, and mount the saw blade onto the arbor. Dave, you have all those legs laid out?
I've got the legs right here.
Great. We'll start with the main saw table. The best way to assemble the table is to set it upside down on a workbench or on top of your machine crate. Before you put the legs on, install the second trunnion lock. Loosen up the lock that is on the table. Then just place the washer in between the trunnion and the saw table stand and turn in the lock. To install the legs, swing the saw table stand straight up and tighten the trunnion locks. Now swing the table around so that the degree scale on the trunnion is facing towards you. Back off the 2 leg socket set screws and insert the legs. With the table oriented in this direction, the gear rack on the legs should face to your left. If you have a long metal ruler, you can set its edge into the gear rack on each leg to help you line up the legs properly. Turn the set screws back in just enough to retain the legs in the table. Don't tighten them. Then place the table back onto the carriage. When the legs are about halfway down, lock the height adjustment in place and tighten up the set screws on the legs. The extension table is very easy to assemble. All you'll have to do is attach the 2 legs and lock them in place with the 2 set screws. Don't over-tighten these set screws. You may strip out the threads in the castings. There are 3 parts needed to assemble the lathe tool rest: the tool rest post, the mount, and the tool rest itself. To assemble this component, simply insert the tool rest post into the mount and tighten the set screw. Then slip the tool rest into the mount and tighten its set screw. The Supershop comes with a 10-inch saw blade, but the machine will accommodate almost any style blade from 8 to 12 inches in diameter. The easiest way to attach the saw blade is to first load the arbor into the spindle and then do all the work right here on the machine. All of the tools used on the Supershop are mounted in the spindle with a collet and drawbar system. This is the same tool mounting system used on most industrial metal milling machines. The Supershop uses a standard R8 collet. These collets have a small slot or keyway on the body. For the collet to be seated properly, this keyway has to engage the key inside the spindle. Insert the collet and turn it until you feel it engage the key. Then slide it all the way in. Then insert the drawbar into the back of the spindle and turn it until it catches the threads of the collet. You can now insert the saw arbor into the collet and draw the collet closed by turning the drawbar. Normally, just turning the drawbar by hand should close the collet tight enough to hold the saw arbor. However, you can insert one of your torque handles into the hole in the spindle collar. This will help keep the spindle from turning and give you a little extra leverage to tighten the collet. With this style arbor, place the saw blade on the arbor shaft with the saw teeth pointed toward the front of the power head, as they do here. Then place the spacer on the shaft, followed by the nut. To get the leverage you need to tighten the arbor, use one of your torque handles to hold the spindle while turning the nut tight with a wrench. Well, now that all the assembly is done, we're ready to make some adjustments and get down to work. The alignment procedures we're going to go through today are covered in the operator's manual. When you align your machine, keep the manual with you and follow the instructions step by step as they're presented in the book. All of these alignments will be very fine adjustments, but they are important because they'll affect your ability to make accurate cuts. We'll start by making sure the saw table is perfectly aligned with the saw blade. Then check the miter gauge and the rip fence. We're not going to do any cutting yet, so until we've completed the adjustments, we'll leave the machine unplugged. To make these adjustments, you'll need a combination 90 and 45 degree square, a pencil, and an ink or chalk marker. Our first job is to make sure the saw table is parallel to the saw blade. Set up the machine as you see here, with the saw blade installed in the spindle and the saw table brought up close to but not touching the blade. The height of the table should be just above the saw arbor. Make sure you lock the carriage, the table height, and the power head. Set the table to 0 and lock the trunnion. Place the miter gauge in the channel closest to the saw blade. Then take a pencil and hold it against the miter gauge with the point touching the blade. You want to keep the point of the pencil on the face of the blade just inside the teeth. With the pencil in this position, slowly turn the blade. Let any high spots on the blade push the pencil back towards your hand. Mark this high spot with a marker. Place the pencil back against the miter gauge and align the pencil point and the high spot together on the infeed side of the table. Now rotate the saw blade and bring the miter gauge and high spot together at the outfeed side of the table. If the pencil does not meet the saw blade in exactly the same way as when you started, you'll have to adjust the position of the table on the trunnion. Loosen these 4 screws and reposition the table slightly. Then try the test again. When the table is aligned properly, carefully tighten all 4 screws securely. Now, we want to make sure that the top surface of the table is at a true 90 degrees to the saw blade. For this test, simply place a square on the table and check the angle of the table using the side of the saw blade as your reference. Make sure the square you use does not touch the saw teeth. If your table is off, as this one is, loosen the trunnion and adjust the angle of the table until it's set at a true 90 degrees to the blade. When you have everything true, hold the table and carefully tighten up the trunnion locks. Now take a look at the 0 degree indicator on the trunnion. If it's off, loosen the screws on the indicator and adjust the mark so that it lines up with the 0 on the trunnion scale. The table also has automatic stops at 0 and 45 degrees. To use this feature, simply push in the stop pin and swing the table down to the 0 degree mark. If it doesn't land right on 0, use a small screwdriver to adjust this set screw until it stops at 0 every time. Check and adjust the auto stops at 45 degrees the same way. And remember to always double check your adjustments before you go on. The final adjustment to the table is to make sure the 90-degree table stops are set correctly. For this test, we installed the drill chuck in the spindle with a strong drill bit in the chuck. The table is then lifted to the full 90-degree position, locked in place, and the carriage is brought up so that the table is close to the end of the drill bit. With the carriage and power head locked in place, hold a square to the table to make sure the drill bit is at a true 90 degrees to the table surface. The edge of the square should lay perfectly flat against the table and the full length of the drill bit. If it does not, you'll have to adjust the 90-degree table stops. These two adjusting bolts are located underneath the table. Try turning the bolts in or out just a quarter of a turn and test your setting with the square again. This procedure will ensure that all of your drill press and router operations will be square. Now that the table is fully aligned, we can turn to the table accessories, starting with the miter gauge. Place the miter gauge in the channel closest to the saw blade. Then loosen the miter gauge handle and place your square against both the face of the miter gauge and the saw blade. When both surfaces are flush with the square, tighten the miter gauge handle and check to see if the 0 indicator lines up with the 0 on the protractor scale. If it does not, use a screwdriver to loosen the set screw on the indicator and line up the marks precisely. Now you can adjust the 0-degree auto stop. Just push the stop pin in and turn the miter gauge back to 0. If the indicator does not stop at 0, use a small screwdriver to adjust the stop pin adjusting screw. To set the auto 45-degree stop, unlock the miter gauge and place your 45-degree angle between the gauge face and the saw blade. Adjust the miter gauge until both surfaces are flush with the angle. Then tighten the miter handle. You can now push in the stop pin and adjust the set screw until it touches the pin. To adjust the second 45-degree stop, place the miter gauge in the opposite direction and follow the same procedures. If you take the time now to set everything up and double check your settings, you won't have to stop in the middle of your first project to do it. The objective in aligning the rip fence is to make sure that the fence is parallel with the saw table. To test the fence, mount it on the saw table in line with one edge of the miter slot. Carefully tighten the front lock and look down the fence to make sure it stays parallel with the miter slot all the way along the length of the fence. If it does not, it's a simple job to make the adjustment. Loosen the 2 screws located on the top of the rip fence. Then line up the fence again with the miter slot, but this time tighten both the front and rear locks. To align the fence, just retighten the 2 screws on the top. That's all that's needed to adjust the rip fence. The extension saw table should also be mounted on the machine and set parallel to the saw blade. To make this adjustment, remove the main saw table and move the carriage and power head to the tailstock end of the bed. Then extend and lock the quill all the way out so the saw blade is as close to the table as possible. You can now use the same technique you used with the main saw table to make your tests. A solid steel or wood ruler works best to span the distance between the table and blade. If you have to make any adjustments to the table, loosen the 4 screws underneath the table and reposition the table. To align the lathe tailstock, remove the saw blade and both saw tables from the machine. Then mount the tailstock with the lathe tail center in place on the end of the bed. The drill chuck is installed into the spindle, and the longest brad point drill bit you have is mounted in the chuck. Move the carriage and power head all the way to the right and lock the power head. Then extend the quill all the way out, or until the point of the drill almost touches the lathe tail center, and lock the quill in place. To align the tailstock vertically, raise or lower the tailstock until the point of the drill and the point on the lathe tail center line up. When you have things lined up, lock the tailstock into position using the handle clamp. You can now position the 2 collars so that they rest against the base. With these collars securely locked onto the tubes, every time you set the tailstock into position, it will be at the correct height. To make the horizontal alignment, loosen the socket head cap screws on the tailstock with an Allen wrench. Then look down on the top of the tailstock, and again line up the 2 points. When it's set, lock it into position by retightening the cap screw. We've now completed the alignment of the machine, and don't forget that if any of these adjustments have to be realigned, all of the procedures are covered in the owner's manual. Now we'd like to show you all of the controls of the Supershop and put each tool together so we can show you how they work. Let's start with the power head. It's the heart of the Supershop. It houses the motor, drive systems, spindle, and controls for all 7 basic tools. It also has 2 power takeoff shafts to drive accessory tools like the bandsaw. The controls on the power head are very straightforward. Starting at the top, we have the quill feed controls. The quill has a full 5-inch travel and can be operated from either side of the machine. Here on the front left-hand side is the quill feed lock. When this ring is turned clockwise and tightened, the quill will lock in place. The inner rings on the right-hand side are the depth stop dial and lock. This feature is most commonly used to control the depth of a drilled hole. We'll show you how to use this control when we set up the drill press. The Supershop has a 1.5 horsepower continuous duty DC motor. You can plug the machine into any grounded 110-volt AC circuit. Never connect the machine to an ungrounded power source or to an extension cord that has had the grounding pin removed. The controls for the motor are right here on the front of the power head. To the left is the keyed power switch. On the right, the motor speed select control. And above these 2 controls is the power on indicator light. To start the motor, first turn the speed control to the lowest position. Then insert the key and turn it to the right. The indicator lamp will light, but you'll notice that the motor will not start to run for about 5 seconds. This is the normal time required for the electronic motor control to start the motor. After the motor is running, turn the speed control clockwise to raise the speed. We use a 3-stage pulley system to maximize drive torque throughout the speed range of the motor. The motor will drive the spindle from 32 RPMs all the way up to 7,200 RPMs. These speeds are infinitely variable within 3 speed stages. The stages correspond to the 3 rings on the speed control dial and the 3 positions on the drive pulleys. The low speed range uses the innermost pulley and the inner ring on the dial. The mid-speed range uses the middle pulley and the middle ring on the dial control. The high-speed range uses the outer pulley and the outer ring. To open the pulley cover, loosen the knob on the back of the power head and slide the cover away. To change belt positions, loosen the motor belt lock and raise the motor mount. When the belt becomes slack, retighten the lock to hold the motor mount up while you move the belt to the position you want. To retension the belt, simply push the motor mount down and lock it in position. Let's move on to the carriage. The Supershop carriage has 4 basic functions. It supports the saw table and controls the height of the table. It holds the lathe tool rest when you're turning wood on the lathe. The carriage can also be used as a mounting surface for special jigs and fixtures. And it provides the left to right movement for the saw table or any tool you have mounted on it. The controls on the carriage are simple. To move the carriage left or right, unlock the carriage lock and turn the travel control hand wheel counterclockwise to go left and clockwise to go right. To raise or lower the table, raise the locking handle and turn the height adjustment hand wheel. To set the position you want, press the locking handle down tight. If you ordered the optional power carriage, complete instructions for its use are in the operator's manual. The first thing you want to do when setting up the table saw is to install the 3/4-inch collet into the spindle and engage the drawbar. Then place the saw table in the carriage and lock it in the highest position. Tilt the table all the way up and lock it in that position. Then install the lower blade guard onto the carriage with a wing nut and T-stud bolt. You can now slip the saw blade into the guard and move the carriage up to the power head. As you approach the power head, guide the saw arbor into the collet. When the arbor is in all the way, tighten up the drawbar. Level out the table and lock both trunnion locks. Always use both trunnion locks to ensure the table won't slip out of position while you're working. You can now lower the saw table down over the blade and make the final adjustment with the carriage so that the blade is centered in the slot. When everything is set, tighten the quill lock, the power head travel locks, the table height lock, and carriage travel lock. Remember, you can use a torque handle on the carriage lock if you like. After you set up the table saw for the first time, you'll want to set the carriage stop. That's this little nut and bolt right here in between the carriage and power head. With the carriage stop set, you can always bring the carriage back to the exact same position so that the saw blade lines up perfectly with the slot in the table every time. The upper blade guard should always be used with the table saw. Slide the guard into position on the rear table tube guide and lock it in place. Always position the guard so that the kerf knife is in line with the center of the saw blade. That's the basic setup for the table saw. From here, you'll want to make adjustments depending on the type of work you intend to do. The blade height is adjusted by raising or lowering the saw table. If you're rip sawing, the rip fence has to be set and locked in place. If you're doing cross cuts, the miter gauge is used to guide your wood in the blade. After you have everything set up, always stop and double check all of the machine's locks before you turn the motor on. Start at the top and work your way around in a circle back to the wood you intend to cut. Check the quill lock first. Quill lock is on. Power head locks. They're tight. Move to the carriage. Carriage lock is tight. Table height lock, tight. Trunnion locks, on. And now you're back to the tabletop, and you can make that last look at the rip fence or miter gauge. Then you're ready to go. Now the circle that I just made, starting at the top of the power head and moving back around to your wood, is what we call the circle of safety. It's the most important habit you need to develop in order to work safely with the Supershop. And it will add to your productivity as well. Remember that old carpenter's adage? Measure twice, cut once. That's all part of the circle of safety. Taking 10 seconds to double check your machine. Look at the cut you're going to make one more time. Then go ahead and do it right the first time safely. It's a work habit we here at Smithy carried over from our experience working with our metalworking machine tools. It's a good habit to get into and the right way to work with your Supershop. To set up the disc sander, insert the arbor of the sanding disc into the collet and tighten down with the drawbar. Double check to make sure you've locked the power head and the quill. Then move the saw table up to the sanding disc. Usually, you want to keep the table about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch away from the sanding surface. Lock the carriage in place and set the height of the table about 1 inch below the center line of the sanding disc. Before you start, run the circle of safety and check those locks. You're now set up to do some freehand sanding. Here, Dave is roughing out an arc, running the disc at about 700 RPMs. Always consult the speed chart in the owner's manual to set the correct speed for the work you're doing. Sanding on a rotating disc is always done on the downside of the disc's rotation. On the Supershop, this safe work area is to the left of the disc's center point. If your project requires beveled sanding, simply tilt the table to the correct angle and readjust the position of the table to the proper height and distance from the sanding disc. In this type of setup, it's very important to securely tighten the trunnion locks on both sides of the table. If the table were to shift while sanding, it would fall onto the sanding disc and damage the table and disc. Freehand sanding is just one of many power sanding techniques that can be done with a sanding disc. We'd like to show you one more before we move on. This technique is precision machine sanding. Here, instead of bringing the wood to the sanding disc, we're advancing the sanding disc into the wood. For this setup, we're using the miter gauge to hold the wood at a true right angle to the sanding disc, and the rip fence to support the wood against the force of the disc. We've also preset the quill depth stop so that each time we advance the sanding disc, it will stop at exactly the same place. With this technique, any number of pieces can be finished sanded to the same length. And remember, you can use this technique with short pieces or, with the help of your extension table, long pieces as well. You can also finish 90-degree cuts, angled cuts, beveled cuts, and compound cuts. All you have to do is adjust the table and miter gauge to the angles you need. Let's move on to the horizontal boring tool. To do horizontal boring, insert the drill chuck into the spindle collet and tighten down with the drawbar. The carriage, with the saw table mounted, can then be brought up and set into position, depending upon the type of work you're doing. It's as easy as that. Although horizontal boring machines are common in industrial wood shops, their use is probably not that familiar to the independent craftsman. For now, just think of it as a standard drill press laid flat. In this configuration, you can now use all of the Supershop's tooling to accurately hold and position even large workpieces for drilling or routing. Use the auto 0-degree stop and the trunnion locks to make sure the drilled holes will be square with your workpiece. Position the carriage close to but not touching the drill bit and lock it into place. Support your workpiece fully on the saw table and use the extension table if you need more room. Use the saw table height adjustment to set the location of the hole and lock it in place. The depth of the hole can be set and locked using the controls on the quill feed control. Here again, you can use the miter gauge, rip fence, or both to help hold your wood. To set up the lathe, install the lathe tailstock and lock it in place with the handle clamp. Your Supershop accessory package includes 2 lathe centers. On the left is the lathe spur drive center. On the right, the Morse taper number 2 cup center. The drive center mounts into the spindle with a 3/4-inch collet. Tighten it with the drawbar, as is normal for all the spindle-mounted tools. The cup center mounts into the tailstock. The lathe tool post assembly is installed into the carriage to complete the basic setup for turning between centers. The wood you intend to turn should always be prepared with lathe centers on both ends. Your owner's manual will give you some suggestions on how to create these centers. It will also give you detailed instructions on mounting your workpiece on the lathe. Here we're turning a spindle between the lathe centers. With this type of setup, the Supershop can handle workpieces up to 34 inches in length. If you want to turn bowls or dishes, you can mount work on a lathe chuck or faceplate. Here we're using the Supershop faceplate to hold and turn our workpiece. The Supershop's wood lathe is one of the most advanced wood-turning machines on the market today. It has the size, the rigidity, the accuracy, and the kind of motor controls wood-turners look long and hard for in a machine. If wood-turning is new to you, you really owe it to yourself to read up on the subject and learn as much as you can about lathe work, because now you own one of the best. To set up the vertical drill press, turn the table all the way to the 90-degree stop and lock the trunnion. Lower the table down close to the carriage and tighten the height lock. Before you raise the machine, move the power head and carriage into the approximate position you'll need for the work you're going to do on the drill press. Make sure the carriage lock and the power head locks are tight before you raise the bed. They could slide down on the weigh tubes if the locks are not on. When the machine is all the way up, always tighten the tail base locking knob. You're now ready to install the drill chuck in the spindle and replace the saw blade insert with the drill insert. If you need to make fine adjustments to the carriage or power head, Remember to keep hold of the travel control hand wheels as you loosen the locks, so these components will not slide down the way tubes out of your control. Now let's look at the quill depth stop controls. If you want to drill a hole to a preset depth, just lower the drill bit down to the surface of the wood. Hold the quill there and turn the depth stop dial to the desired depth. Then tighten the depth stop lock. Now every time we lower the quill, the drill bit will stop at the preset depth of 1 inch, and our holes will all be the same. Now let's switch over to a router operation. The Supershop router uses the same basic setup as the vertical drill press, with a few important exceptions. To make this setup, extend the quill about 4 inches and lock it in place. Then mount the router guard onto the lower part of the quill, as you see here, with the clamp on the far side of the quill. The router bit you intend to use should always be mounted directly into the spindle's collet, not the drill chuck. When the bit is in place, the table can be raised or lowered so that the workpiece is brought into the approximate position for the cut. Then securely lock the carriage and set the final position of the router bit by raising or lowering the quill. There are many different types of routing techniques that can be done on the Supershop. All are done safe and efficient if you follow these simple rules. First, whenever possible, use some type of guide to help you feed the work into the bit. Your accessory pack includes 2 guide posts that screw into the table insert to help you guide the workpiece. If you're doing an internal cut, the rip fence can be used as a guide. You can also make a wooden fence to mount to the standard rip fence. We designed the rip fence so that you can easily attach auxiliary fixtures right to it using these 4 holes. This type of fence is a very accurate way to guide work into the router bit. Always feed the wood into the rotation of the router bit. If you're working on the front side of the bit, as we're doing here, feed the wood from left to right. Always use the router guard. Never rush the cut. Feed the wood into the bit at a moderate rate, letting the cutting edge do the work. And whenever a deep profile is being cut, make multiple passes instead of one heavy cut. This technique is safer and will give you a finer finish. Remember, if you have any questions about the operation of your Supershop, check with the operator's manual first before you start. Shop will run better and last longer if you keep it clean. So it's a good habit to routinely clean the sawdust off the machine as your work progresses. A good bench brush is great for sweeping off the way tubes and getting down into the tight places. If the sawdust is left to build up on guides and on the sliding surfaces, it will eventually cause them to bind. A toothbrush is a good tool for cleaning the gear racks of sawdust or built-up wax. Another area that requires special attention on the Supershop is inside the spindle nose. This is the precision ground spindle taper. In order to maintain the machine's accuracy and help prevent wear, always keep this surface clean. Before you load a collet into the spindle, clean this area with a soft cloth to make sure there's no sawdust or dirt on the spindle taper. The same attention should be given to your collets. These are precision components that should be treated as such. Always clean the collets before inserting them into the spindle. The lathe tailstock also has a machine taper. Always clean this taper before you install the lathe cup center. The best solution to cleaning up sawdust is to remove the dust as you work with a dust collector. With this system, the sawdust is vacuumed away from your machine as fast as you make it, so there's very little dust left behind to clean up. That's probably why the Supershop dust collector is our most popular accessory. It's a high-volume double-bag design with the power necessary to pick up dust from your table saw, bandsaw, joiner, and sanders. The Supershop dust collector has a 17.8-gallon capacity storage bag, its own set of casters for portability, and a 10-foot hose. It comes with all the connectors and clamps you'll need to go right to work. The dust collector will cut down on your cleanup time and efficiently reduce airborne dust in your shop. With today's dust collecting technology, there really isn't an easier, more comfortable way to work with wood. Let's look at the other Supershop accessories that can increase your productivity. When it comes to saws, I don't think there's any denying that the #1 machine in any woodworking shop is the table saw. It's the workhorse, the center of the shop. But following close behind is the bandsaw. The bandsaw is unequaled in versatility, depth of cut capability, and speed. Our 11-inch Supershop bandsaw is no exception to the rule. It's a tough little machine with all the right features. For starters, it has a full 6-inch depth of cut with a deep 10.5-inch throat capacity that gives you plenty of room to work. You'll have plenty of support and control, too, with the 11 3/4 by 12-inch table. This table has 2 miter slots, so you can use the miter gauge for accurate cross-cutting, or lock it into the second slot to act as a rip fence. The table can also be accurately adjusted to make bevel cuts to 45 degrees. The bandsaw does not require any special adapters or adjustments to install or use. Simply insert the bandsaw legs into the bed and lock them in place with the clamping handle. Then move the power head to the left and engage the drive coupling into the power takeoff shaft. When you combine the Supershop's variable speed motor with the versatility of a bandsaw, you have a combination that's hard to beat. Now you can really go by the book and adjust that blade speed to the type of material you're cutting. Then go one step further and fine-tune that speed to the condition of your wood, the condition of your blade, and the type of cut you're doing. Now that's control. You also can use a variety of blades, from 1/8 of an inch up to 1/2 an inch. So you'll have the maneuverability to cut tight corners and the ability to hold a straight cut through rough timber up to 6 inches thick. The saw has all-metal construction with a one-piece wheel cover to make blade changing safe and easy. And all the controls for blade tension and tracking are there to make adjustments simple. This bandsaw is designed to make those tough cuts that just can't be done on any other type of saw. It should definitely be high on your list of must-have accessories. A perfect complement to your 12-inch disc sander is the Supershop 6-inch belt sander. This is one labor-saving accessory that will pay for itself time and time again. Setting up the sander on your machine is quick and easy. Simply mount the sander just like the bandsaw and engage the sander's drive coupling. The 6 by 9-inch cast iron work table can be set up in a variety of different positions for a wide range of sanding applications. It can be used across the belt at 90 degrees as a work support, or at any angle up to 45 for bevel sanding. The table can be used as a backstop to hold work, or set up parallel to the sanding belt to act as a fence. Remember, with a belt sander, the abrasive moves in a straight line, so you can use it to sand with the grain for surfacing and smoothing wood to a fine finish. That's the great advantage of a belt sander. And of course, you're not limited to just wood. With your variable speed motor, you have the correct speed to sand just about any material, and do it all with a precision only a machine can give you. Having the ability to quickly and accurately prepare wood to make surfaces straight, perfectly flat, and square to one another is the first step to achieving a fine fit in all your woodworking projects. And it's especially important if you're building furniture and cabinets. If you'd like to move beyond the quality you're getting from lumberyard prepared wood, our jointer will set you on the right course. The Supershop 6-inch jointer is a heavyweight. Its 33-inch cast iron table will give you the stability you need to make accurate cuts. And the 3-inch diameter 4-knife cutting head will deliver rapid cuts with a superior finish. The jointer has a 26-inch fence that's fully adjustable across the entire 6-inch cutting width. That's important if you want to make rabbet cuts that are neat, clean, and ready for glue. If you want to produce long beveled cuts, the fence can be set at any angle from -45 to +45 degrees. And it also has 3 adjustable auto stops for your convenience. Setting the depth of cut is easy. Just turn the control knob in or out. The pointer on the depth of cut scale will tell you how much wood is being removed on each pass. the jointer is driven by the lower power takeoff shaft, so you can quickly move from the jointer back to the table saw just as you would if you were running standalone machines. With this jointer, you'll be able to truly square up stock, quickly form tongues for tongue and groove joints, and reduce the finishing time on all your projects by starting with lumber that is surfaced straight, flat, and true. There is one warning we must mention about this jointer. Do not attempt to install this accessory on any other type of multi-purpose machine tool. Only a Supershop has the power and rigidity to handle this class of jointer. It's a nice machine that we're proud to have as part of our machine tool family. One of the unique advantages of owning a Supershop is the ability to do metalworking right in your own shop. Now you can make decorative trim pieces, build your own custom-made hardware, or modify store-bought hardware just the way you want it. Combine metal turning with wood turning, or build projects completely in metal. You can do those simple home repair jobs you used to avoid, or tackle that complicated special project you know you could build yourself if you only had the right tools. All of these projects are possible when you use the Supershop's metal turning, milling, and drilling accessories. Let's look at the basic tooling you'll need to get started. For lathe work, you'll need a chuck to hold and turn your work, a cutting tool, and a lathe tool post. The fastest and most accurate way to chuck small diameter work is to use your R8 collet chucks. We have collets from 3/16 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch in our catalog. If you're going to work with standard bar stock sizes, these R8 chucks work great. For greater capacity, you can install a 3-jaw self-centering chuck. Our 5-inch 3-jaw chuck spins right onto the Supershop threaded spindle. It can be used for most general turning operations where round or hexagonal stock is used. The chuck comes with 2 sets of jaws and a chuck key. For most lathe operations, a cutting tool with a single cutting edge is brought against the rotating workpiece to make the cut. With this standard lathe setup, tool sharpness and tool rigidity are the key ingredients to making a smooth, accurate cut. Here we're using a carbide insert cutting tool mounted on our lathe tool post. The insert on this cutter is manufactured with a cutting edge, so there's no sharpening required. The Supershop tool post features dovetail ways with adjustable gibs, a 3.5-inch travel, and calibrated dial. It mounts directly to the T-slots on the carriage and can be rotated a full 360 degrees on its base for facing cuts, turning cuts, or tapers. If your project needs to be grooved, keyed, slotted, drilled, or just machined flat, the Supershop can do that too, with the heavy-duty milling table. In milling, the workpiece is always held on a sliding table and fed into the revolving cutting tool. The shape of the cut is governed by the profile of the milling cutter and the controlled movement of the table. Our milling table is all cast iron and measures 5½ inches by 12 inches. The movement of the table is controlled by 2 calibrated hand wheels, so you can adjust the position of your workpiece by thousandths of an inch. The table can also drill accurately spaced holes, or do reaming, countersinking, and counterboring operations. Well, that's the basics. If you'd like to work with metal, we invite you to call our toll-free helpline and talk with us about the work you'd like to do. We have years of metalworking experience and can give you expert advice on choosing the right tools and techniques to get your job done. We hope this video has given you a good understanding of your new Supershop multi-purpose tool system. Remember, there's detailed information about all of the safety precautions, assembly, and operating procedures right in your operator's manual. It's your guide to years of safe and productive woodworking with your Supershop. And if you ever have any questions about your machine, give us a call. We'll always be here to help you with your Supershop.